new study coming out soon on what Spot Hero is doing for the way people make travel decisions, which is going to be a really interesting analysis. And so I'm going to talk about today is first with rail, then the bus, and a little bit about transit and air. So I think if you look at Chicago now, the first thing is we have a really strong framework to start with, but there's been mixed success in pushing us to the next level. In the last few months, there's been renewed optimism, so I think we're going to give this presentation on a high note. But it's a long grind to make it happen. And again, I'm going to point some exciting things that have happened. So the framework for a regional rail network is quite good. If you look at Chicago Hub, it's run by Amtrak. The red lines are existing Amtrak routes. The green lines are connecting bus services, which I'll see is really underdeveloped in a lot of ways. So the skeleton is really quite good. If you ride Amtrak, you know the quality of the services differs by route, time performance, and so forth. And that's really the framework that for the last 20 years, our region's been working to push to the next level with higher speed service. There's really no other hub in Chicago in the United States quite like this. New York has many of these same qualities, but it's a much different geographic context being along the coast. And if you look at the high-speed rail map, it's very, very similar. And you've probably seen this map before because it's not exactly anything new because it's been out there for a while. But the red lines blue lines represent proposed high-speed service to 110 mile per hour, which is the maximum you can go without highway grade crossing eliminations. And so that's the speed projected for the Midwest. The yellow represents 90 mile per hour service, which also could be done with existing track. And the green represents other routes, probably at somewhat slower speeds. And there's a soap opera for each of these routes. So I'm going to go through a few of them and some recent breakthroughs on where we're seeing 100 plus mile per hour service with some success. But this framework is really exciting for Chicago. And I'll trace the evolution of that a little bit. So in Chicago, the route that's almost dominates our state's attention to this network is Chicago-St. Louis, partly because about 99% of the route is in Illinois. So we provide essentially all the funding for this route. And Chicago-St. Louis has 5 trains a day. It's a single track route. It's privately owned, but it is ground zero for Illinois' high-speed network for the near future. And if you look at this route, you can see the plan is to shave nearly an hour off the schedules to St. Louis. And a lot of work has been done over the years. St. Louis is a relatively modern and efficient station. This is a picture of one of the Lincoln service trains they call from Chicago. And Illinois has done a tremendous amount of investment to prepare this corridor for something bigger and better. This map shows virtually every station along the route has been either replaced with a new station or upgraded. We have a new signal system that's been installed. We're waiting for federal approval for the speed improvements to be allowed with it. There's been a tremendous amount of work for the highway crossings to prepare for speeds of above 90 miles per hour. Lots of passing tracks built to sort of allow faster service without the delays, because on-time performance, struggles now at around 80% or so, and we really need to get that higher. So the state deserves a lot of credit for gradually trying to improve this corridor. Now the bad news is, though, that ridership, we're still waiting. The platform is set, but the delivery of the higher speed service we'll see is very slow. So we did some analysis the last few weeks looking at the different routes around the country and seeing how they've done since 2015. And if you look at this, you can see mostly it's been an upward trajectory around the country in terms of traffic changes on the route. But the Illinois system has suffered kind of this lengthy malaise. I feel like a weather reporter here. We got a storm front coming in. St. Louis today. We had this severe drop after 2015, plateauing until recently some really exciting improvements are starting. And we think it's the cumulative effect of all these investments. But as you can see, a lot of us with the Obama high-speed rail funding and so forth, would have anticipated by now Illinois would be substantially higher. And so the frustration, I think, over the St. Louis route hopefully will soon be relieved if this upward trajectory we saw just this year. This is my forecast for the year based on traffic through the end of July. So Illinois has been in a way an underperformer or by national standards. The drop in fuel prices that happened in 2015, no doubt, was a big factor here. But as we look at this, you see a little bit later we'll talk about Michigan, which is really in a lot of ways eclipsed Illinois in terms of delivering improvements that stimulate ridership, and the Hiawatha corridor to Milwaukee, which has been in many ways a star performer. And if you were to push the chart back to 2010, these trends would even be more dramatic than they show here. So the rail side's a mixed picture right now with some recent optimism. So then the Milwaukee route, which I'll start with, the state of Wisconsin is really interested in pushing from 7 to 10 routes per day, ultimately cutting some time off the schedule, which isn't easy on a freight railroad track. And that had a lot of momentum until about 6 months ago, when the city of Glenview and village of Glenview and some other neighbor North Shore suburbs began resisting it because of the increased traffic, freight train parking in their community and so forth that would be needed with the new passing track. We had a very unusual situation of the city government actually investing in PR and other efforts to stop the expansion for the sake of the concerns of their citizens. And as a result of that, the state of Illinois stepped back from its plan to fund the passing track in Glenview, which was really kind of a striking development. Wisconsin said, no problem, we're going to push ahead with the 10 trains without the passing track. So we had renewed optimism. And at that point, the freight railroad said, not so fast. I think we need those passing tracks to increase service to Milwaukee. And as a result of that, we're kind of waiting to see where the next shoe is going to drop. And so the Milwaukee service, we expect some big things, but there's some political dimensions that have to be overcome to allow the route to expand to 10 trains. That said, the route is really a national showpiece with on-time performance well above 90%. Commuters using it. There's 10 tickets you can buy. A lot of trains are sold out, and it's a real example of what rail can deliver if the service is on time, efficient, and modern. So Milwaukee will look at it and see what happens. Now, Michigan, I think it surprised a lot of us because what's happened there is a section of track that had been owned by a private railroad, the Norfolk Southern Railroad, right here, you can see in green. Much of that the state of Michigan has bought. So unlike Illinois, where we're in fact negotiating with a private railroad to increase service to St. Louis, the state of Michigan will own most of the segment from the state boundary all the way to Detroit, giving them complete control of the corridor, which is a tremendous advantage for accelerating the pace of improvements. As we saw, Michigan now has been able to dramatically improve the reliability of the Detroit service, still limited to 3 trains a day. They're still suffering from the Indiana problem. So you get all the way to Michigan City, then you get the remainder of Chicago on a highly congested freight railroad that causes lots of delay. But in the bigger picture, we see Michigan has taken a strategy quite different from Illinois of actually taking the track into their control east of Kalamazoo, adding to a section that is already owned by Amtrak, and that's allowed for some substantial improvements to the corridor, which have only recently been publicized. So last 2018, see an announcement here about $384 million in track improvements going from the Detroit service. And so Michigan, I think, is in effect showing Illinois that with enhanced reliability, passengers do respond to the Detroit route's a real success. So in our state, what's happening lately? I think here's a map of our state system, which is really pretty strikingly extensive compared to other states. And with the Pritzker bill passed by Governor Pritzker a few months ago, we had two exciting developments. The first of which was new funding for a service to Rockford that eventually could be extended to Dubuque, but would put 4 new cities on the Illinois rail map that would involve extending the metro route running out to Elgin into a city that's been unserved by rail for a long time. And this requires extensive track improvements through the northwest part of the state. And so after years of planning, this appears to be poised to move ahead if the funding for the capital bill that was authorized is eventually spent. And the other route, the Quad Cities route, also received funding, partly to build a new connection in this little town called Wyanett, and to improve the track west of there for the Rock Island lines, to Moline, which is exciting enough about this service. They actually built features into a transit center to become their rail station. So they are very excited about this service. Each would likely be served by 2 trains a day. And you can see how really round out the Chicago hub. And the excitement over this in Quad Cities is particularly dramatic. And there's a sense that they've waited long enough. And so with the capital bill, that hub we have in Chicago could become even stronger. And so there's a bit of optimism there as well. Now, as I mentioned, the big breakthrough many of us are looking for requires a little bit more visionary thinking than perhaps any individual state can do. And the one big idea that's out there, pardon this microphone, is that the Midwest High School Rail Association has one of those ideas that can be a framework for some pretty dramatic speed reductions. And their idea is called Crossrail. It's a belt route that would effectively be a super railroad that would run all the way across the city from the south side up the current Metro Electric corridor out west to O'Hare. And the concept with that would be that this rail system we have very fast access to downtown Chicago without a lot of freight interference. You could integrate O'Hare Airport into the system in a really dynamic way. And we could get around this problem that everybody coming into Chicago has to make connections to get from one station or one train line to the next. But Chicago could sort of have a more efficient through travel system. And we see with the O'Hare expansions, O'Hare will soon become one of the most dramatic examples of a vast global airport connecting complex with a fairly poor rail connection in today's blue line. So as this percolates out there, we'll see the developments on this are really interesting because all these systems are going to require better ways to serve downtown Chicago with fewer delays involving freight railroads, and this would serve multiple lines, including possibly the Milwaukee line, which could be routed via O'Hare. Oh, and Chicago Union Station is getting dramatic increases in investment to make it a great global hub. Who's been to Union Station, say, in the last 6 months? Gee, I'm surprised this crowd's been over there. But it's Amtrak has finally come out of the ice, you might say, and has really embraced Union Stations becoming not only a great transportation center, but the West Loop hub that allows commerce and entertainment, hospitality, and train travel all to come together in an exciting environment. So with that, Union Station is poised to become what could be a hub of much greater importance if some of these other supporting developments could take place. And I got special significance to me because as an 8-year-old kid, this would be our entrance way in Chicago when I was growing up in western Ohio. And so I've seen this station go through the worst. And the last few months have been very gratifying to see the developments there. And the mayor has now seen this. Emmanuel made Union Station a big part of his platform. We're still waiting for Mayor Lightfoot to sort of play her hand on this. But we did have a rather rough start with transit last week, nothing with Union Station, but related to how we may envision our rail improvements. And I'll get to that in a minute. But in the long-range plan for our region, in Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning's long-range vision, one of their projects that would completely transform Chicago's connecting efficiency and augment that crosswalk project I mentioned before would be to replace the existing track configuration at Union Station with something called the West Loop Transportation Center, which would involve essentially building a through railroad under Clinton Street, possibly Canal, but more likely Clinton, that would have intercity trains on one level, possibly enhancements to the rapid transit system, including the long dormant idea of building a spur on the Red Line that would branch off near Chinatown on the south and near North Avenue, Fullerton on the north, and go through the West Loop with possibly a level for buses and a concourse level. And, you know, people laugh at the cost of this, saying, in my lifetime, this will never see this. But in terms of cost, it's actually not that expensive because it's a large cut and cover operation. Would bring a lot of efficiencies, and trains from two stations could use this. The Ogilvy Station trains, as well as the Union Station trains, could operate into an arrangement that involves through tracks at the lowest level, which are far more efficient than all these stub-in stations we have today. So the West Loop Transportation Center is out there sort of waiting for a political breakthrough. Cook County is quite interested in it. Metro, Amtrak, and others haven't really put any weight behind it. So it's the big idea, though, that could grease the wheel for some pretty exciting changes. So what happened last week? Well, if you've watched the news, you may have heard some rather disheartening commentary back and forth between President Parkwinkle of Cook County and Mayor Lightfoot about an idea that the county's pushed to try to take the Metro Electric corridor, which went south. I was just on that about an hour ago, so a couple hours ago, so I know every inch of this corridor for my daily commute, and try to integrate this into the city's transit system by adding CTA-style low fares to make the fares about $2.50 for anybody using that corridor in the city. And the current fares run about, $3 to $6, $3 to $5 in that corridor. And to try to use an effort to have Metro and CTA cooperation to better serve the south side, and to take this corridor, which I mentioned is so important to the city of the future, because it offers sort of a fast, wide right-of-way from the south to downtown, and to try to start by making the fares low and really boosting service, with thoughts that bigger things could come later. And if you saw the press release, Mayor Lightfoot said, veto. Don't like the idea. It's going to hurt the CTA. It's going to divert transit from the CTA. It could take energy from the CTA's effort to extend the red line, so there's probably some hidden factors there. But it was kind of a reminder in this town that we want better transportation, but we still have all these turf wars that are out there that rear their ugly head. That Metro has an agenda, Amtrak has an agenda, the state does, CTA does, and all that makes kind of this comprehensive vision hard to achieve without everybody not on the same page demanding that we have a better integrated, faster, and more efficient system. So we'll see how this plays out. I've got quite a few calls on that this week, and hope the mayor's not upset with me for me voicing my comment that this was a good way to sort of take a baby step toward really having everybody work together on a project that kind of breaks down the boundaries a little bit. So, but anyway, on that part, other good things are happening. Indiana has an exciting project to improve the South Shoreline, which has gotten a lot of funding and attention. And with that, we're seeing, again, the last 6 months have brought more good news than bad news, which is great to see. And the Midwest continues to attract lots of interest from the federal government because we have a regional interstate passenger rail commission where the states work together to try to garner funds. And that's been a real stable feature of our effort to improve rail. So, are we going to get fast trains soon? The St. Louis line is our best hope for the next deployment because the tracks are ready. The signals, we're waiting for federal permission to approve the positive train control. And we're overcoming what was a disappointing setback that just was very frustrating. The state government of various states went together to have double-deck cars built in Rochelle for service. And after a year or so, it was clear those cars were not going to pass federal safety inspections. So the effort to build those double-deck cars for the Illinois routes and Iowa service and others were canceled, and the process had to start over. So now the effort is to acquire more traditional single-level cars that would operate in St. Louis, and we're waiting for news as to how quickly those can come and whether the faster trains in St. Louis can, begin operating with federal permission. So, mixed picture for rail, but lots of good things to point. So, I'm now going to switch for about 10 minutes and maybe test your loyalty because when people hear me talk about intercity bus, they fall asleep. So, we'll see if this crowd, if you can resist testing your phones for the next 10 minutes, you're checking your phones because I'm watching you. The intercity bus is the forgotten mode. Many people who are green to the core would not consider going to the Greyhound station and buying a ticket. I find myself on Greyhound once or twice a year, and I gotta look who I'm talking to before I admit that. Because people think, oh, you're desperate, or ain't you for a car, or I could have took you there to save you your misery, and it's all those things. So I'm an unabashed person who admits you'll see me at the Greyhound station from time to time. But we'll see Chicago is here, got some good things happening, and some missed opportunities. First is overall a weak spot for a megaregion. Now, I guess in this room, the number of people that have been on a truly intercity bus, not counting an airport shuttle service or an express pace bus, but on a true intercity bus, is probably less than 10%. In the last year, it's been on Megabus, Greyhound, Trailways. Okay. Maybe 15%, or 50% above the average. But we have some lessons to learn from neighboring states where they're embracing things in a pretty cool way. So we're going to start by saying we've mapped the state bus network, and it's a fraction of what it was, but it's still there. Frequencies you tend to be really low on a lot of routes, but the core is there. We'll see, but there's some big gaps. One big negative. Maybe the biggest negative of all is we do not have a centrally located bus station in the loop. And if you look at New York, the Port Authority bus station, that's as good as it gets. Maybe not the aesthetics, but the location. Washington, D.C., Washington Union Station, the parking garage is now their primary bus station, right there. Philadelphia's building a new station facility near 30th Street. So Boston is at South Station now, the main station. We had a facility. We tried to get Skidmore, Orange, and Merrill to celebrate with us the legacy of the station. They sort of said, we're proud of our architecture, but that station is not necessarily one of them. But it's almost a full block station at Randolph and Clark. And it had bus access through Lower Wacker Drive. Everybody remember that? You come up like a corkscrew to go up a level, and there'd be this much clearance down there and all that stuff. Someone offered to sell you a few things when you get off the bus, and all the qualities of urban excitement you would want. Ronnie's Steakhouse right in the place, all that good stuff. So anyway, it was the largest privately operated bus station in the country, perhaps the world. And Greyhound moved out, they moved over to a station on Harrison. Nice station, but it's a little bit remote. But then something interesting happened in 2006. Megabus started service and plopped up right next to Amtrak. This is a picture of Canal, the Megabus double-deckers. And we started the semblance of a hub around Union Station, which was exciting. And Megabus began its full U.S. operation right here in Chicago. It was the first city to have a renaissance in intercity bus travel. It was very, very exciting to watch that. You had a fair amount of synergy and competition with Amtrak. And that was really an exciting sort of pivot of intercity bus having a new relevance. Gradually, though, the real estate development in the area, the new CTA bus station, to which Megabus apparently wasn't invited to participate in, other factors, construction on Canal Street, Megabus got moved. And they're now over on Polk, right next to the old post office. And it's a pretty awful location. Transit subways about 5 blocks, 4 blocks or so, but there's no retail. If you look at which pretty desolate, you're looking west, straight kind of from just in front of the post office. And no retail around there. Megabus has downsized the single bus operations and thinned out frequencies a bit. I think the location has a lot to do with it. So we have a somewhat dysfunctional system where we don't have a really good downtown terminal. So we track this, and for our article we have coming out on how many Illinois cities had bus service. It went from 103 in 1980, back when that Greyhound station was still in its prime, and went all the way down to 24, now it's rebounded to 26. So there's been a bit of a revival for intercity bus service. That's been good, but for a great global city, we don't have the kind of network that you would expect to see here, as you would see in New York, Philadelphia, and so forth. In the middle of this, we have an interesting development with this big expansion of Latino bus lines coming up from Texas. This is Tornado Bus, which has a station in Little Village that has about 4 buses a day to Dallas. So there's some things happening in undercurrents that are bringing bus travel back. And also our state government is kind of coming out of the ice on this as well. That we began a few years ago starting to subsidize to enhance this rural network. And 2 routes that have emerged are a new route from Bloomington to Rockford, which just started about 2-3 weeks ago, which is serving the workers in the logistics business and a lot of the warehouses going up in that part of the state. And also a route that serves Chicago to Moline that restored rail service to DeKalb, or bus service to DeKalb, which had no intercity bus service, remarkably. So students in Northern Illinois had no way to travel on an intercity bus. And so the state is starting to take intercity bus travel seriously, we'll see. And here's a picture of the ribbon cutting. I'm sure this, for the new Rockford service, I'm sure this was a massive town celebration, right? the new Greyhound leaving at 7 a.m. every day. It's a start, all right? Or at least acknowledging bus travel, doing something tangible, we'll see. So those are the only 2 routes in the state were aware they get any sort of official state support. And with that, because of the decline of this great global city, we have some real gaps in mobility. Amtrak service, but just a month ago, earlier this summer actually, Amtrak started a new thruway bus connection in Milwaukee with a 5-minute connection. Leaving the train, go outside, the bus leaves 5 minutes later to Green Bay twice a day. So Wisconsin is really starting to do things that we ought to be thinking more about in Illinois. Peoria, no express bus service from Peoria to downtown Chicago. You get to O'Hare, but not to downtown. Dayton, no way to get from A to B unless you jump on Greyhound, not express. Columbus, Ohio, same thing. Fort Wayne, the route I grew up with as a kid. No express bus service, no Amtrak. Grand Rapids, one Amtrak train a day, no express buses, Megabus pulled out because of the station situation. But Wisconsin has a very sophisticated system now with bus connections from Kalamazoo. So there's real excitement in Michigan to integrate Amtrak and bus in ways we don't yet do in Illinois, where they have a whole network of systems that their buses timed with Indian Trail bus lines to align with Amtrak to better serve the lower peninsula of Michigan State. So with that, we'll see bus travel is still backwater, but there's some things happening. So in my last 10 minutes here, I'm going to give you a quick update on what's happening with transit and how it relates to this. I think the good news is, after lots of dysfunction, if you've been in Chicago a while, you know what that dysfunction is, of our transit agencies, we have good management in place. And at least they all pretend to like each other in one of the different service modes, which is a real start. We don't have any breakthrough projects that are currently being pushed, but there's some out there that are quite notable. And here is the most disheartening chart of all for all of us who really love transportation. And that's the fact that ridership on most of the system plateaued or peaked around 2015 or so. We had tremendous growth, and then about 2017 things started to flatten out. And there's no sign of that upward tilt happening right now, although CTA Rail has had a pretty good couple of years, and Metropolitan Bus is a paradox that we're all struggling with to try to understand what could cause us to get these trends back to where we'd like to see them. And we think much of that rise that occurred between 2004 and 2012 was partly due to changing preferences of people, that they could travel on public transportation, do work on board, they had their devices, they had phone calls and texting, and it was sort of an extension of their own leisure time on buses or trains, which you couldn't do in cars. Lots of factors, but we actually studied that by looking and spying on it. We probably got into our data set somewhere, where we sent teams of students out to ride Metro, buses and so forth, to count the number of people using devices. We found it went from about 30% in the 2009, I think it was, to about 60% in 2015 when we stopped doing the study. So if you go on a Metro train, about 60–70% of people at any point in which we observed you were using a device. And over the course of the trip, we think it's closer to 90%. So if you don't believe us on discovering this, try taking a 90-minute Metro train without your phone. You'll feel lost, you'll feel confused, you'll feel like you're wasting time. People just now instinctively use that time. That started to plateau, and lots of other factors. Gas prices come down, people started working from home, Uber and Lyft are created, spot heroes, all kind of factors are chipping away at transit demand. And so in our region, we have really two major projects that have possible game-changing capabilities. One is the red-purple modernization up the north lakefront from Belmont to Evanston, by making that a super railroad with faster times, less congestion, more frequency. We really could enhance ridership because the service quality suffers now so much with the crowding. And of course, there's the plan to extend the Red Line south, which is less about dramatically increasing ridership, bringing some equity to our transportation system in the south. And I mentioned the other one is really this idea of the West Loop Transportation Center, Crossrail, which Midwest High-Speed Rail is proposing to try to really focus Union Station to become a great hub like it could be. But unfortunately, we don't have momentum for the latter project that I think could really turn that curve back upward. Now, across the country, a lot of transit agencies are feeling a need to try to align themselves with ride-sharing companies to develop partnerships, to use rideshare and transit, to get people, the culture of users to think about transit in combination with ride-sharing and to try to work together to complement each other. And we're seeing a lot of developments. We put a map together of all the cool partnerships that are happening around the country, of transit agencies and Uber working together. Like in Dayton, free rides to points on canceled bus routes. We can travel on Lyft free if your bus route was canceled. Other places have free rides to light rail stations. In Charlotte, they have discounts to riding to certain stations of the Link system. And these are proliferating around the country. And it's very exciting, but usage remains really low. And I think that's the most discouraging thing, that Lyft users and Uber users, to get them to start blending their lifestyle with transit through these programs hasn't taken off in super exciting ways, but the technology is getting better now, where these services are going to be integrated much more, and more cities are exploring it. We in Chicago only have 2 small programs like this. One is in Bannockburn, where Lyft has a program with Metra, working with the north suburbs to try to facilitate ridership to some different employers in Bannockburn, to Metra, and in Oak Brook, there's a program as well. I think it's either with Lyft or Via, to try to integrate rideshare and Metro use there. Well, we're pushing the CTA to really try to experiment working with Uber and Lyft in ways that could, I think, enhance the CTA's image, which we think would be learning to work together would be a really good thing. So I'm going to close this whirlwind tour. I mentioned Detroit is doing some cool things, offering discounts for late night trips to transit. So if you take Uber Lyft to the Woodward bus line, you get $5 off your Lyft trip. In our region, PACE is doing good work expanding a shoulder service. It's the other kind of game-changing thing we're seeing, when you have authority to ride on the shoulders of our expressways at speeds of about, I think it's 35 miles per hour. So final thing, I'm just going to go a couple minutes and make this real fast, and perhaps a little long here, is our state has 10 airports with scheduled passenger service. So let me ask you another question. Who's flown out of an Illinois airport other than O'Hare and Midway? Good. What airport was that? Moline. Okay. Yeah, Moline is the largest of all the downstate airports. But interestingly enough, all of these are tiny compared to Chicago. We had a new development 3 months ago where $162 million was authorized by the state for state funding to create the South Suburban Airport near Peatone. That's a major breakthrough for a third airport for our region. Gary is the third airport, but it currently doesn't have passenger service. And $160 million going toward a new interchange off I-57 that will support the airport. But there's a lot of questions as how successful this airport would be given the downstate experience. The money would go toward infrastructure improvements with hopefully a private company building the actual airport itself, which is the current plan. And there's big excitement. I live in the south suburbs about this, maybe overexcitement, but there's a massive logistics business in the area. Amazon has several large warehouses. There's huge trucking facilities that can integrate so that everybody's built, mostly be for cargo, but possibly passenger service as well. The risk is, will airlines come? And the downstate experience is somewhat iffy. United, American, and Delta doesn't operate its larger jets to any downstate airport, only uses its regional partners with the regional jets, and have expressed no interest in the South Suburban Airport. But a city of our size typically would be expected to have 3 airports. And what we did was track how downstate airports have done in the last 10 years, how much they've grown. And on the good news, they're all growing, except for Quad Cities. That's your Moline Airport. They've had a tough time. You're probably not flying out of there anymore, right? That's what it's down. Bloomington is down. But you look at this growth, and this is over the course of a year, the number of boardings. You know, these are like 40 people a day or so, if you do the math. I think this is 300 a day growing in Peoria. Those are really small numbers. So the volumes of downstate airports are low. There's not a lot of assurance the South Suburban Airport would be a whole lot different. It could be, but it's really hard to guess. And we tracked what share of all boardings in Illinois come from downstate airports. And we see it's compared to Chicago. So downstate has about 3% as many boardings as Chicago, and that number is gradually falling and it's starting to rise again, but it's still only about 3%. So O'Hare and Midway are massive powerhouses that have overshadowed all the other states' airports we'll see. So that brings me to my last comment here. We'll do some questions. It's been a remarkable year for O'Hare. The mayor, before he left office, was insistent that the O'Hare 21 project move forward at full speed. And they had a competition for designing the terminals that attracted global attention. And Wang Studios won that the biggest prize to rebuild Terminal 2. And the plan is to replace the existing Terminal 2 with this large, sort of innovative, cavernous, architecturally beautiful terminal that will serve international flights for both American and United, with two more remote concourses complementing the existing concourse at United, with also a massively expanded international terminal over here. And along with that, O'Hare has won, it continues to grow. Last week it was named America's best connected airport. United and American are both in expansion mode. But as I mentioned, we don't have good rail connections. Intercity bus connections out here remain somewhat limited. But this project is going full speed. So this is a view looking at the beautiful Terminal 2. This is on the week of the 50th anniversary of the terminal. I rather like the Mies van der Rohe design, but National Air Surveys say that passengers hate it. They want high ceilings, they want retail, they want inspirational artwork, and so forth. So Terminal 2 will be demolished to make this new terminal that will allow for capacity expansions of up to about 50%, with the international terminal growing as well with the addition of lots of new gates. And this will all be financed with airport user fees and increased passenger facility charge for all tickets applied to the airport. And you can see that the number of gates here will go up by about 35. The total square footage of the airport will go up closer to 60% or so. And the real question we're all asking is what efforts are going to be made to make this a truly multimodal transportation center with better bus, rail, preferably high-speed rail access. And there's scenarios being contemplated, there's ideas, there's a new intermodal parking facility here that's right next to the metro line serving there. So we're hopeful that the new mayor will have some interest in better integrating O'Hare into this large Chicago's role as a great hub for all modes of travel, and that remains to be seen. So I too am peddling a book today, if you like it. It's Terminal Town. It features all of Chicago's Airbus and rail terminals. We're selling for $15 if you're interested. And we try to tell the role of all these great transportation facilities in Chicago with lots of pictures, maps, and geographic analysis of how they've served. So thank you all. So let's